Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Can't Stand podcast. It's been a while since you have last heard my voice outside of YouTube, and that is for reasons. For private reasons, to be frank. For those who follow me on social media, you probably know what I'm talking about. For everyone else, my aunt passed away a few weeks ago, and after I had been busy taking care of her in the months prior, my job was to bring her deceased body back home to be buried in our family grave in Turkey. I really thought of it as a job because keeping myself together emotionally, not becoming a train wreck, was important to get it all done. So after I was stressed out due to the organization of the burial and everything else that had to be taken care of, I got back home to Germany, delved right into a huge pile of work at my job, and then I got ill. Someone might have infected me with some sort of virus, maybe I was simply too exhausted after everything to continue with everyday life. I was down for a week and a half. As I felt a bit better, I returned to work, and this included private work for Can't Stand. And by the time you listen to this episode, the video documentary about the Khaganate Empire will have also been finally released on YouTube. Then, the book. Oh, the damn book. It's taken me so long to wrap it up, and it seems as if I am just one step away from finishing it, but then I noticed something that was missing or not in the correct order, and I have to take another look. I'm talking of course about my history book of the Göktürk Empire. Well, the second book about the Göktürk Empire, because I already released a book about the Göktürks 2 years ago already. That first book was rather short, we have 180 pages. It gave a basic overview of ancient Turkic and steppe culture, Tengrism, and the rise of the Göktürks under the appanage of Bumin and İstemi. But the new second book is over 450 pages long. It's comprehensive and more professionally written, even the layout is new. You won't believe how many days and nights I invested to learn the basics of book layouts, design and such. But that's exactly how I feel about it, as an investment into something bigger. I've also utilized the experience that I gained since the release of the first book in 2022 and have included many new maps, graphics and authentic AI-generated portraits this time around. Therefore, I can't wait for you to read Empire of the Gokturks, hopefully very soon. Just a little more patience, please. Until then, why don't you give a try to my first book from 2 years ago? I re-released it just recently, at least the ebook version, because I can finally sell that one on my own new personal store, unlike the print edition that's only available on Amazon. Now titled The Gokturks, a basic overview of the first Turkic Khaganate, it's the unchanged 2022 version but with a new cover and a new price. Only $12 instead of $22. So in anticipation of the new, longer book, why don't you try out this first edition? Go to can'tstandshop.com and purchase it digitally. One last PSA. All membership tiers on YouTube have been updated. Until recently we had 4 tiers, with each higher tier offering more perks. Now, all tiers have also received permanent discounts on Can't Stand Shop. Tier 1 starts with 5%, Tier 2 gets 10%, Tier 3 gets 20%, and Tier 4, the highest tier, even 30% off of all articles, from my book to shirts to mugs and image packs. Tiers 3 and 4 further receive the first Göktürk book completely free of charge digitally. Now ain't that something, Nöker? With that being said, the Khaganate video is finally out and feedback was positive. The new book will be available very soon. I even started live streaming on YouTube recently. It was a lot of fun answering your questions live and discussing in general Turkic and steppe history with you. I feel confident enough to do a live stream every week from now on. I think Saturday evenings, European time, is ideal. Now, what else does that leave? The podcast, of course. Right now, I am in preparation of some interviews that will be featured right here on the podcast with people of academic background nonetheless. But the big news this week is that I signed my first partnership ever. I am proud to announce that effective immediately, the backlog of my Can't Stand YouTube channel is now available in audio form in podcast format. You might have noticed before playing this episode. This means that you can seamlessly listen to Can't Stand on the go, on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. This was made possible by the fine folks over on AdLarge. Therefore, I am now part of the AdLarge podcasting network and a member of Megaphone.fm, by Spotify. Quite exciting. This brings us to today's topic. This episode is actually a two-parter. I want to do something different than usual on Can't Stand on YouTube. Sure, I'm gonna tell you a story from the past. After all, I am a rather talented storyteller, if I may say so myself. But this story is taken from my aforementioned Göktürk book from 2022. In this specific chapter, I explained how one of the most important Turkic rulers of all time fought with everything he had, liberated his people in the end from subjugation, and finally founded his own independent Turkic state. I am of course talking about the sacred, the mythical, the blessed with Kut and supported by Tengri, Boomin Kagan. Bumin's story is not just a personal one, however, and further explains the origins of the Ashina Göktürk dynasty, the legend of Asena, the sacred she-wolf, and the factual backstory of the Turkic peoples just before the rise of the Gokturks. Now come join me on this journey back to the past in a place far, far away, the Altai Mountains. As happens so often in history, wars between states or ethnic groups in Asia's late antiquity also led to flight and displacement. South of the Altai region is the Taklamakan Desert, an inhospitable place to live. On the northern ring, however, at the transition to the Altai, better living conditions prevailed. From the Tarim Basin to the Gaochang region, this belt was dotted with many oasis towns in which many peoples, including Chinese and Indo-Iranians, lived and ruled over the millennia. In late antiquity, families that descended from the legendary Xiongnu Hans had say here. In 436 or 439, Chinese dynasties suddenly began to expel these families. In one village, all the family members were killed by the invaders. All except for a 10-year-old boy who managed to escape. But the boy was injured and didn't get very far. That is when he came across a she-wolf who befriended him. The ruler of the invaders learned of this ordeal and ordered his soldiers to kill the boy as well as the she-wolf, but the she-wolf fled with the boy at incredible speed to a mountain north of the Gaochang region. She housed them at a cave surrounded by a plain with rich vegetation. The she-wolf fed the boy and watched him grow into a man. At some point, the two, quote-unquote, merged, and she gave birth to 10 little boys, half wolf and half human, who then grew into strong men. In adulthood, these 10 left the cave area and mingled with the surrounding villages. Each of them in turn had children, and so an extended family of 700 came into being. They all bore the name Ashina in honor of their mother, who was called Asena. The symbol of the wolf has since been omnipotent in Turkic literature and in some political circles ever since. But Asena was not a grey wolf, unlike the imagination of certain nationalist circles, but a blue wolf, Gökbörde, blue because of her fur, which apparently shimmered bluish when the boy saw her in the moonlight, and also because of her connection to Gök Tengri, the ruler of the eternal blue sky, who, acting as a god, had sent Asena to save the boy, and thus his people, from extinction. So with new courage, the 10 Ashina men studied the art of war, in practice, not on paper, and took revenge on their father's enemies. At this moment, this legend of Asena, or Tale of Asena, turns into the legend of Ergenekon. The protective mountain ranges in where the boy and the she-wolf had taken refuge represented the only protection of the family from the enemies. A blacksmith named Bertegin, presumably one of the 10 sons, made a hammer with the help of which the men could smash the large mountain range and clear the way, kinda like Thor. This opened the gate to the outside world and became the moment of the mythical birth of the Turk. So the Turk was, according to legend, literally a wolf's child and had a talent for forging metals with which weapons could be made. The story is obviously a myth that is supposed to metaphorically explain the origin of the Turk and Turkic civilizations. Interestingly, it has parallels with the origin stories of the Indo-Aryan Wusun, who lived nearby, and even with that of the Romans, believe it or not. The city of Rome came into being after orphaned brothers Romulus and Remus were taken in and suckled by a she-wolf. The two grew up to be men, and Romulus stamped out the city named after him. After killing his brother, that is. A fine detail that is extinct from the Tale of Asena. The wolf then played a not so insignificant role in the collective consciousness of the Romans as a national totem animal, along with the eagle, of course. Among the Turks, in turn, the wolf has played a particularly important role in their cosmology ever since. It is certainly one of the original national totem animals of the Turkic peoples alongside the horse, eagle or falcon, and the goat. The Göktürks, after founding their empire, introduced the wolf as a totem animal, which from then on was shown as a sign on official standards and banners as observed by several Chinese travelers and diplomats. But this myth is, as so often in history, indeed based on a real incident. For example, the special units of the Göktürks were called böre, meaning wolves. Moreover, the rulers of the Göktürks held annual ceremonies in the Cave of the Ancients to commemorate the Ergenekon legend every year. And the Chinese annals tell us about a historical event that could explain the background of this legend. The last Han princes in Gaochang, Wuhui and Anzu, once fled north from an invading army of the Chinese Wei dynasty and arrived in the Altai region, where they resettled with their families. They became vassals of the Ruran Khaganate, though. The Turks, as is well known, later also become their vassals and coincidentally appear in the chronologies of Asia at the very same time in the Altai in 439 when the last Hans disappeared from Gaochang. This is the origin of the claim by Chinese scholars that the Turks would be the descendants of the Xiongnu, that is, the ancient Hans. In any case, about 100 years after the flight to the Altai Mountains, the descendants of the she-wolf Asena reappear in history, this time in the context of certainly real events. In the meantime, their clan had joined forces with the surrounding population. There is evidence that the family now comprised far more than a few dozen members and had also integrated other tribes into its sphere of influence. For one, the Chinese chronicles already speak not of one but 500 families. 500 families which are attributed by the authors to the entity of the Ashina Clan. Since the tribe had fled from the Gaochang region towards the Altai Mountains in the same period as the Huns, the assumption that many of these refugees had united upon or after arrival at the Altai is not unfounded, in my humble opinion. Thus, the Chinese authors were most likely referring to the many small original Ashina families who were literally related to each other by blood and over time merged with the other families to form a larger clan or tribe. Then again, interestingly, the Ashina are described in both the Book of Sui and the Tongdian as a mixture of various barbarian ethnic groups. These Tukue, as the Chinese called them, now dwelt with the Ashina being the core tribe in the Altai area. Through the trade routes in the south, they came into contact with the merchants of the oasis cities on the Tarim Basin, such as those from Kocha. The later history of the Göktürks shows that they supported these city-states in their fight for survival against the Chinese. The close ties are also evident from the numerous images of Turkic soldiers and nobles from wall paintings in the Kızıl Caves, the Red Caves near Aksu. The drawings in Kocha and Hotan, which are supposed to depict the takeover of the city by Bumin's troops, also indicate this. Interestingly, these depictions were made in 552, the same year the transfer of power to the Turks took place. That is very unusual. Therefore, we may indeed assume that already in the early phase of their ethnogenesis, the Ashina were in active exchange with cities such as Aksu, Kashgar, Hotan and Turfan, the neighboring cities within the periphery of the original homeland of the first Ashina Turks. Did the Ashina then possibly already have significant influence on the Silk Road before the establishment of their empire? There is no evidence for this yet. All chronicles, excavations, and accounts found so far indicate that the Ashina clan later seized the cities along the Silk Road by force. Provided a city recognized the suzerainty of the Turks, the Ashina refrained from punishing them, added the area to their sphere of influence, and moved on. But unlike the western part of the Silk Road in cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, the eastern part bordering China, Tibet and Mongolia had already come into contact with the Ashina. This possibly facilitated their quick integration into the Göktürk Empire. But the conquest of cities, the incorporation of trade routes, and the recognition of local subjects were nothing but a big dream for a certain Ashina Tuvu. Tuvu was a fourth-generation descendant of the she-wolf Asena, so the Chinese chronicles tell us. His father, Ashyan, had surrendered to the Ruran Khaganate several decades earlier. The Ruran, who figure prominently in the prologue of my book, were the undisputed lords of the steppe in Tuvu's time as well. They ruled a broad strip from Manchuria in East Asia to Lake Balkhash in Kazakhstan in Western Asia. They were later deviously called wiggly worms by the Chinese, Yuan Yuan, instead of Ruran, presumably because they had never been a serious threat to the Chinese states, and this includes the Wei dynasty. But for the steppe peoples, there was no escape. It was the Ruran who for the first time called their rulers Khagan, and accordingly claimed suzerainty over the entire steppe. The origin of their noble dynasty is unclear. Para-Mongolic origins are not unrealistic, since the Ruran dynasty seems to have been related with the ancient Mongolic Donghu tribe, but the claim that the Ruran were all definitely ancestors of the Mongols is not proven. Unfortunately, this did not stop generations of historians, including René Grosset, whom I hold in high esteem, from repeating this claim over and over again. A Mongol influence on the linguistic level is certainly demonstrable, but it is equally likely that at least parts of the Ruran spoke Turkic. This does not make the ruling dynasty Turkic, as long as Turkic was not the only mother tongue, as it probably was with the Xiongnu. Instead, we must assume that the Ruran as a whole, like many other ruling dynasties of antiquity, were a product of different ethnicities. Turco-Mongol would be a more appropriate term, with the Mongol part being larger than the Turkic part. But the Turks and also the verifiable actual ancestors of the Mongols did not live together with, but under, the rule of the Ruran. It was not a totally just society, rather a giving on the part of the subjects and a taking on the side of the ruling elite, as was often in world history, I might add. Indeed, we may call the Ruran Khaganate to be the very first actual steppe empire, not a confederation with a loosely binding monarchy like that of the Xiongnu, but a state with clear political hierarchies from top to bottom. It had most probably been Ashina Ashyan who reluctantly accepted the vassalization of his clan by the Khagan. We do not know what exactly took place in detail, but since Ashyan probably ruled around the year 500 and the Turkic Töles, or Tile, had surprisingly defeated the Ruran during an uprising in 508, I would argue that at the same time the Ashina also revolted against the Ruran but drew the short straw. From then on, the Ashina were no longer tolerated by the Ruran in their domain but had to be ready for action at any time on the Khagan's command to protect the ruler's interests militarily, with the Altai becoming a dominion of the Khaganate. Tuvu, therefore, continued to be Yapgu, king of the Ashina, but was officially subject to the Ruran Khaganate. The integration of the Ashina Turks cannot be doubted. The period in which we find ourselves marks, as you might know, the transition from antiquity to the Middle Ages. We refer to the years between 300 and 600 more precisely as late antiquity, since in Europe the feudal societies we know from the textbooks had not yet been established at all in the year 500, the official beginning of the Middle Ages in European schoolbooks. In Asia, the situation was quite different. Practically all states, those of the sedentary and those of the nomadic peoples, were feudalistic in nature. One family held sway, depending on the culture being sometimes more and sometimes less dependent on the favor of the people and the low nobility. A visitor from Europe could find strict slavery in China, as well as watch the Ruran cattle breeders doing their farm labor. But a distinctive feature of late Asian antiquity were the constant migratory movements. While some Indo-Aryan or Indo-Iranian groups stayed in the oasis towns at the Terem, many Turkic-speaking tribes moved continuously westward since at least the end of the Xiongnu state. Proponents of the Trans-Eurasian theory, like Professor Martinet Robetz, even argue that the Turkic peoples had been moving away from their actual homeland in Manchuria since approximately 3000 or 2000 BC. In any case, many of them were, in late antiquity, organized in the loose federation of the notorious Tile or Turles, who I have just mentioned. And when the leader of the Turles Federation took up arms against the Ruran, the Ashina were not the only Turks who joined the rebellion, it seems. The Turkic ethnicity or cultural identity was by now certainly graspable. Only the term still referred to the Ashina clan, its fellow tribes, and all Turkic-speaking allies within their sphere of influence. The Turkic peoples with their respective dialects had risen to become the dominant ethnic group from the Altai all the way to Eastern Europe, and the rebellion of 508 had left a deep impression on the Ruran nobility. Even if the Ashina clan, the Turles Federation, and other Turkic groups such as the Oghur in Europe and the Kyrgyz at Lake Baikal did not live together under one roof due to geographical distances and political fragmentation, they were firstly all Turkic-speaking, secondly had evidently settled in the mentioned areas permanently, and thirdly were not always friends, but indeed rarely enemies against each other. Before the formation of the Göktürk Empire, inner Turkic wars were surprisingly rare, a formerly common thesis according to which the Kyrgyz were originally not Turks and were only Turkicized or Turkified in the 6th century was vehemently contradicted by some historians. Thus, the appearance of the Kyrgyz, who are described in ancient sources as red-haired and with green eyes, should not be an exclusion criterion for the fact that they were Turkic speakers and belonged to the Turkic cultural sphere. The heterogeneity of the Turkic peoples should therefore not be disregarded. In any case, the coexistence of the tribes implies the existence of a conception regarding the common identity. Besides the Turks, Proto-Mongols also lived in the steppes, but mainly in Northeast Asia. They were either subjugated by the Gokturks later on or driven out completely, as we will see in later chapters of my book. In any case, the Turkic-speaking ethnic groups enumerated and others whose history remains to be told were aware of their commonalities. This cannot have escaped the glances of the rulers of the Ruran. After a long civil war, a certain Anagui ascended the throne of the Ruran in 520, sweeping away the second recorded rebellion of the Turles. In the meantime, the wounds in the Ruran state had already turned into deep scars. Accordingly, Anagui Khagan ruled with an iron fist from the newly established capital of Mumocheng, which indeed is the real name, under his command. He reportedly had the capital fortified with 2 rows of ramparts and protected by a group of elite Mongol bodyguards. For 30 years, he was able to consolidate and keep his power in the state and put down any further uprisings. Among others, there had been a rebellion by the Turkic-speaking Dingling. Tuvu was still unable to free the Ashina from bondage, though, but when his son Bumin was crowned leader of the Ashina in the 530s or 540s, the fate of Anagui and his henchmen had already been sealed. For if the geopolitical situation in the Eurasian steppe did not change at first, Bumin's assumption of power was like a domino that set off a long chain of events. Almost a century after his ancestors had fled to the Altai, it was to be Bumin who not only took revenge on the old enemies of his ancestors, which would be the Chinese, but also led his family to new, previously unimagined power. Bumin was apparently also fed up with the Khagan's rule and was driven by his family's lowly position among the Ruran hierarchy to change something about the predicament. But his path was one of trials and tribulations. Meanwhile, the Ashina clan had already risen to unintended fame. According to the legend of Asena, they had been making their own weapons since their arrival in the Altai. The art of blacksmithing was indeed internalized by the family as they were located in or near the Altai mountains and could make use of them accordingly. By supplying numerous states, tribes and possibly even private mercenaries with those weapons and armor, the Ashina clan earned a reputation as a family of excellent armorers and weapon makers. Consequently, their very existence posed a permanent threat to the continued existence of the Ruran. No other Turkic people of late antiquity was as visceral in the production of weapons and armor as the Ashina. Possibly, despite the de jure political affiliation with the Khagan, the family members continued to live in economic self-sufficiency. as in fact did all the semi-nomads of the steppe before them. Since they were also talented archers and horsemen who could very well take care of themselves in case of war, their military capacities were not bad at all. The Chinese Book of Zhou even records an event in 542 when an army of Turkic warriors attempted to attack northern China. A man named Yuwen, descended from the royal Taizu dynasty, was to make first contact with the Turks of the Ashina in the 8th year of his political career as governor of Suzhou. This would be the year 542. The Book of Zhou, volume 27, tells us the following. The Turks of Bumin had been put to flight. The cited source implies a ruse and not a real battle as the reason, but at least became known to the Chinese as a political entity, I suppose. Then again, it is very important because they acted independently of their liege Anagü. However, the Ashina's numerical inferiority to the Ruran and other Turkic peoples such as the Turles kept Bumin from any further daring adventures. Moreover, his immediate neighbors of the Turles Federation were once again in revolt against the Ruran. Once again, they were challenging the Khagan's supremacy over the Eurasian steppe. Instead of joining their revolt, however, Bumin took a very different path. A strange path. He remained neutral at first. We do not know what was going on in his mind and whether he was following a master plan. Given the speed with which Bumin acted in the years that followed, it is not improbable to assume the latter. We are going to reconstruct step by step the course of events between 545 until 552, the period that led to the creation of the Göktürk Khaganate. Instead of merely relying on the findings of historians, which may well be helpful to us, I will make use primarily of Chinese, Korean and Turkic primary sources and provide a chronological listing of events. Then, a classification of all events into the larger framework will follow, which may help us to grasp Bumin's motives and intentions. In the end, you will be able to understand why this first great Turkic empire came into being and how it expanded so rapidly into all directions. It should be noted in advance that besides political ambitions and motives, such as maintaining power and fame, climatic and consequently socio-economic changes of the 6th century will also play a role. But one step at a time.